Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I am interviewing a friend of mine, Kate Arthur, who has written a book, and she's going to share all about this book with us today. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Kate, Kate Arthur is a wife and mother who grew up in the Midwest, experiencing an almost idyllic childhood. She spent 40 years in a career of healthcare as a critical care RN, and clinical consultant, and is now retired living in Missouri with her husband and two corgis. After a past life regression changed her life, she began writing her first novel in 2016. And in 2022, at the age of 65, she published it on Amazon. Her book is a fictional novel based on a true story called I Am Anne Boleyn, a memoir in two different voices. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. Good to be here.
Good to have you.
Thank you
I
very
almost
much.
called you Anne, and that's not by mistake. This is what I do when people are channeling other people. I was doing it when I was at my Egypt trip with someone who was there, and I kept calling her, and I'm like, okay, there's no mistake here. And she said, yes, that person is a channel or a teacher of mine. So I don't think it's any mistake that I wanted to call you Anne just then. So
That's quite all right. My middle name actually is Anne, and we both know that Anne is with me a lot.
yes,
So
awesome. Okay, Kate,
anyway,
we're going to jump right in. So, what was it that started this whole process that led to writing this book?
maybe you're one of those people that somebody has said about you, I know you'd write a good book if you ever wrote a book, right?
Yes.
And people have told me my whole life, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And life was busy. Life was just too busy to stop and take time and write a book. Um, I was always working or traveling or doing something like that or raising children. There was never enough time to sit and be quiet. When I became disabled in 2013, I had some neck injuries that resulted in about 5 surgeries, and I couldn't work anymore. And all of a sudden, I had to sit with myself and be still. About that time, I was introduced to Ainsley MacLeod, the psychic, and I participated in one of his past life regressions. And in that regression, me, who I am the world's worst meditator, I have monkey mind. It jumps all over the place. So for me to sit in a meditation and actually get something out of it was quite miraculous to begin with. But I did get something out of it, something that has been around for a long time, and I think I knew it, but I didn't have the confidence. I was, 2013, how old was I? I was in my 60s. I'm 72 now, so it's been a while. The reason why I wrote the book was because Anne asked me to. So when you have a direct request from someone to write a book about them, you kind of have to figure out why. In the regression, I remember Ainsley asking us to go through a meditation and to see if in our minds we were male or female. Who are you? Back in time. And I remember looking down and I saw myself as a woman, kind of slender, small breasts, which is different now. But sorry. Then he asked us to look around and see where we were. And I remember in my mind, I looked down and I could see a huge river going through a city, but it wasn't a modern city. It was an old city. And there were men working on rooftops and thatching. And somehow I knew that the river was the Thames in England. And the next thing he asked the crowd to do was to um, ask your spirit guides to take you to a place or to an important moment in that life. And I remember being in a room, beautiful, beautiful, wealthy type place, a palace. And I was playing with a little girl, a little 2-year-old girl. I was aware that she was my daughter, and she had beautiful ginger curls and a little blue cap on, and we were just having the best time. And a woman came to the door of this room and she called the child to her. And somehow I felt that I would never see that child again. And I knew she was mine. And I was terrified. I was crushed, just crushed. Well, Ainsley asked us after that to go to our death in that life. And I came up blank, just nothing. So at the very end, he asks us to ask our guides, do you have a message for me? And as clear as day, I heard in my mind, your daughter loves you. I don't have a daughter in this life, but I did in that one. Now that's what began everything. She began coming to me in, I think the 21st century parlance would be data dumps, messages in my mind that were just too big to contain. But it took a while after that for me to figure all of this out. But that was the first clue that that little girl that I was with was Elizabeth I, who is or was the greatest Queen of England ever. And the conclusion was, the only conclusion was that I was her mother, Anne Boleyn. And that carried an awful lot of weight, both good and bad, because she's a very notorious and controversial woman. So that's where it began.
Yeah, we were talking before we started the recording about how controversial she was and, you know, prompted the why, because out of all the wives, she's the most talked about.
Yes. You make a really good point. She is for very good reason. Henry was obsessed with Anne. For those of you who don't know Anne Boleyn, as Liz just said, she's the second of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And I'm sure some of you have seen The Tudors and other series that they've put on air, even Wolf Hall, which I personally have real issues with, but they talk about Anne Boleyn as though she was a husband stealer, a vixen, oversexed, powerful, someone who caused the church in England, the Catholic Church in England, to be dissolved, ruined. She's sometimes called the patron saint of the Reformation, but she had a lousy reputation. Now, if you can imagine with me for a second, you are a maid. You're a maid in the Queen's chambers, and you have to wait on her, right? And your whole life you've grown up with knowing that Queen Catherine is Henry VIII's wife, and you are there to work in her household. And her husband starts flirting with you and making all kinds of innuendo that he's interested in you. Henry's been a part of your family for a while because he had an affair with your older sister. So you've got a lot of background here. And all of a sudden, he's interested in you. Now, how would you feel? She was conflicted. You know, what am I supposed to do? My mistress is the queen. I love the queen. And now what am I supposed to do with my sister is pregnant after sleeping with Henry? I don't want to be here. How do I get out of this and still keep my reputation? Anne had only one deal breaker in her mind when it came to marrying somebody. The one thing that Anne insisted on was that all of her children be considered legitimate in polite society so that they would be accepted. She wanted that to be a wife and a mother who was accepted by the gentry and by the aristocracy. She was the daughter of a courtier, so she was kind of looked like a social climber to the people who were already at the top. And so she's trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? And she had a boyfriend. The man that she was in love with was Henry Percy, and he was in love with her. She was in love with him. They were handfasted. And all of a sudden, Henry decides, no, I want her. Now, what do you do? And it became very clear to Anne that she was not going to get out of this. There was no way out. Henry had cut off every escape route possible for Anne. And so she had to go through it. He asked her to be his official mistress. Now, for a woman who wants legitimate children, that doesn't look like such a good deal. Plus the fact she can easily see what Henry did to her sister. She can easily see that Henry is dumping his wife of some 20 years just to have a girlfriend. He just really doesn't look all that appetizing to Anne. And yet everybody thinks and everybody says, oh, she's stealing him away from his sainted wife. She's a bad girl. She's teasing him. She's doing bad things. She's giving it up for him. And the truth of the matter was, Anne wasn't. So when she came to me in my mind and showed me this part of her life, I felt like I had to tell her side of the story because it was different than what everybody was writing about her. She wasn't a vixen. She was a big flirt. I'm sure some of us can relate to that.
Well, if
You
somebody's
know, you
paying
just get along
attention
with
to
that.
you and they happen to be the king, it's flattering.
Yeah,
I
it
could see
is.
that for a young girl.
It's very flattering. And Henry was great at giving gifts. He gave expensive gifts and he gave titles and positions to family members, to my brother, to my father, or to Anne's brother and father. And that's the other thing you figure out real quick, that I easily slip in and out of talking about Anne in the first person. It's just because in my head, she and I are both facets of the same diamond. Um, I found out that we shared a soul. Anne is me and I am her from a 500-year distance. But a lot of the issues that I have in this life are directly related to problems I had in that life. And that's what Ainsley taught me, Ainsley MacLeod, that a lot of the problems we have in current day find their source in past lives. And this certainly was the case for me now.
Yeah, that's come up for me too. And Ainsley has said the same for me. You know, those irrational fears or those aches and pains or whatever they may be, those injuries can flare up, in this life. And I've had that happen to me. Let's talk about that. There was a after call where you got confirmation from Ainsley about your experience. I think that's relevant. Let's talk about that.
Okay. About 3 months after the group regression that I found out um, about the little girl, the whole time in between September and December, all I could think of was Anne Boleyn. And then I kept thinking, I've read Ainsley's books. He says that, you know, everybody thinks they were Cleopatra or Alexander the Great or someone, but the chances of you being anybody of historical note are just infinitesimal, sorry. And if you know me now, I'm kind of as comfortable as an old pair of shearling slippers, wearing a pair right now. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty much a sand pebble. You wouldn't pick me out of a crowd. She's just one of the other faces. And so I thought, I'm going to sound like an idiot if I tell somebody that I used to be Anne Boleyn. They're never going to believe me. They'll think I've gone nuts. So I wanted to find out yes or no. So I scheduled an appointment with him and he did a reading for me. About halfway through it, I had to stop him. I said, I got to ask you something. And I was on the edge of my chair because he was kind of talking about more recent lives that I've had and not something back that far. And he says, okay, I'll ask my guides. And so I said, and believe me, I was more tongue-tied than I've ever been because it just was kind of embarrassed to ask. I said, "Can you tell me if I was Anne Boleyn?" And his reaction, I really wish I had taped it. His reaction was such that I could almost see him go, "No." He
Uh-huh.
has been asked, I understand, by many people if they have a relationship to Anne Boleyn. And I heard him turn and do an aside to speak to his guides. And then he came back to our conversation and um, he said, "Yes, you are." And what happened then was life changing. Anne poured out through me. She used my voice. She uses the language that I'm familiar with because I don't know any others. I'm not bilingual,
Hmm.
but, and I don't know Old English. So her pain at being treated the way she was came searing, pouring out of me, that how she was used by Henry and how she was separated from her little tiny girl, a 2.5-year-old daughter. It was all there, all to be used by Henry to get a son. And the feeling was just fury, anger. Why did this happen to me? Um, after the conversation I had with Ainsley, he said I should journal, maybe write a book about it. And it was maybe 5 more weeks after that. And one morning on my way to the kitchen with my first cup of coffee, um, Anne shows up in my head. I think I am claircognizant. If you're familiar with that, the clear knowing,
Hmm.
because sometimes I have these knowings that aren't mine. They don't originate with me. They come from someplace else. I don't know where. I just know that I pick up on them. And Anne, as I was familiar with her story anyway, Anne just began telling me things about her life and what she thought. And I grabbed a pencil, I grabbed paper, and as it was over, I tried to write down as much as I could remember. Now, if that is channeling, I guess maybe I channeled Anne, or Anne used me to get her message through. But that wasn't the last time. That was the first time. Well, the second time, really, after knowing that Anne was so furious. And it's just a sense of having been grievously wronged. For those of you who don't know, the old tale about Henry's 6 wives, it goes like this. Um, Divorce, beheaded, died. Divorce, beheaded, survived. And he did have Anne Boleyn beheaded. He had her beheaded on charges of adultery, incest with her brother, and treason, because it was treasonous to imagine that the king died. He had his machine of state arrest her, accuse her, bring her to trial, and had her head off in 17 days.
Wow.
That's all. 17 days. Now, unless it's one of your old Texas lynchings, that's pretty quick, especially for a queen. And it's the first time in history that it had ever happened
Hmm.
to a queen. So it broke precedent everywhere. And I I felt her pain. I felt that sense of deep injustice. I'm one of those people that, to me, the truth matters. It matters more than anything else. And to not be believed when I'm telling the truth, oh, that's something I can't stand it. It really destroys me. And I want to fight back. So now I'm fighting back for her with the book, trying to explain to people that it's possible that someone you used to be has something to say and you need to know it. and it will help you if you listen.
I love
Does
that.
that
And
help?
I love that you speak about truth. And let me just say that that is a quality of an indigo. So that was spoken like a true indigo. You're a truth seeker and speaker, and totally, frustrated if somebody challenges your truth. And it's
Yeah.
very much in line with an indigo to be open to these gifts, to have claircognizance. I think claircognizance is one of the least spoken about clairs out there because it's clear
Mhm.
knowing. I'm a
Yeah.
claircognizant. And it's actually like
You are.
been wrong to know things, and people have gotten tagged as know-it-all, so then people don't want to be know-it-alls, so that
Yes.
they don't want to know
Yes.
everything. So claircognizance basically just sort of gets hidden and minimized,
Yes.
so you're not nicknamed know-it-all, but in
Yeah.
reality, like, that clear knowing, and it is just instant knowing things, and
Mhm.
sometimes seconds before they happen.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to,
My
yeah,
Go
talk a
ahead.
little bit about your gifts. Go ahead. You were getting ready to say.
My my experience with I I'm very reticent about calling it psychic phenomena because psychic is for somebody who's like Ainsley McLeod. But not me. I'm still, in my mind, I'm still the sand pebble. And
We all have these, though. We all have these. We're
we
just
do,
not trained to be aware of them.
right. When I was 12 years old, the first time I had anything unusual that didn't make sense to anybody else but made perfect sense to me come up. It was 1 year after my grandmother had died, and I was very close to her. She appeared to me in the doorway of my bedroom, standing there wearing all black, which she never wore in real life. She always wore floral dresses. And she's she's speaking to me, but not in words. But I know what she's saying. And so afterwards, when she was gone, I I looked up and I called for my parents. Mom, Dad, Grandma came, Grandma came. And it's just your imagination, is what you hear. Or aren't you an imaginative little girl? Or you probably felt that way about her and you loved her so much that you just wanted to see her. Well, this went on for a while until finally I pushed the point. I said, no, I saw Grandma. They had me go to talk to the parish priest. That was a big mistake. In the course of an hour conversation, he tried the soft sell of, you're just a bright, imaginative little girl, and you just think you saw her. I said, no, I know what I saw. It was my grandmother. And he finally dropped the bomb on me toward the end of our session. And he said, well, Kate, only God or the devil can see the dead, and you're not either one. And he threatened me with an exorcism.
Wow.
So from that day forward, I shut that down. When it happened to me, I told no one. I didn't want anybody to know something about me that would hurt me. And so zip the lip. If you see it, if you say it, don't tell anybody.
Hmm.
And it pretty much stayed that way for a long time. Well, a few years ago, in 2009, my husband and I went to England for a vacation. Now, I'd only flown through England to get someplace else. I'd never visited in this lifetime. And I was thrilled at the thought of being a tourist, right? Well, England is historic everywhere. There's not a piece of ground that doesn't have 2,000 or 20,000 years of history that comes with it. And so I was in hog heaven. I'm a bit of a monarchist, at least I was. And I had a friend of mine come over from Ireland and meet us there. She was the best, or the maid of honor in our wedding, so I wanted her to come over. And since she'd never seen London, she's, oh, I'll go with you guys. So we get our little London triptych and we're seeing the sights. And that particular day, we started out and we went to the Tower of London.
Mm.
The Tower of London, if you're familiar with it, is not just a palace, it's also a prison. And it's one of the most notorious and allegedly haunted places in all of London. But both, well, when Anne Boleyn was there the night before her coronation, she stayed in the Tower of London. It had just been redecorated for her. It was beautiful. But this particular time, I wasn't, and this was before I ever talked to Ainsley, so I had no idea of any connection at all. So they're having a festival to show off artifacts from Henry's reign because it's the 500th year anniversary of his accession to the throne. In 1509, he was crowned king. It's now 2009, and we go over to see it. And it was fantastic. It was gorgeous. They had his chainmail, they had his horse's armor from when he was a young and fit king to when he was older and morbidly obese, and so on. Anyway, my friend kind of got ahead with Jim, and they're looking at a display case of something, and I'm hanging back talking to somebody about chainmail. So I took off looking for them, and I see this crowd of people around this big glass display case. Jim is up at the front, and I'm 4 people back. So pushy American that I am, I kind of nudged my way up to the front. I tap him on the shoulder. He's real tall. And I looked over his shoulder asking, what are you looking at? And about the time I asked, Jim turned toward me to his left. The guy on his left, who was as tall as he was, moved back. And I glanced in to this case. And inside the case was the block on which the royals were beheaded.
Mm. Wow.
What happened to me then was witnessed. So this is something I can't deny. Most of my unexplainable events are not witnessed, but this one was. And I turned white as a ghost, white as a sheet, and I backed myself out of the crowd to the wall and slid down the wall before I passed out. I didn't pass out, but they said, what's wrong? What's wrong? I don't know. I've got to get out of here. So they helped me get out. As soon as we got out of the White Tower, I was fine. No problem at all. Now, knowing that, I also know that Anne was not beheaded on that block. She was beheaded by a swordsman. She simply kneeled down and the swordsman made the cut. But the people who were beheaded on that would be her brother, George Boleyn, and the 4 men that were accused with her and lost their lives because of her. If wood is organic, and it is, someone told me it might be able to hold flesh memories. And imagine all the blood spilt into that piece of wood. To this day, I can't tell you how that happened to me or why, but I can tell you this. Whatever it was so profound, it turned me inside out. So those are 2 examples, early and late, of events in my life I just don't have an explanation for. But then there's the knowing. Afterwards, there's the knowing. And you know, it comes to you as though from spirit. I don't want to make any claims to be religious. I'm not, but you know, in your mind.
Yeah, and items do hold energy and past memory. There is psychometry where you hold
Yes.
objects and you can read the objects. You can read
Yes.
a room, you can read an object, and yes, they do hold memory. And I've heard other stories of people encountering things, from past lives and having those memories come up. Just
I
a
believe
couple weeks
that.
ago, it happened just
What's
a
that?
couple weeks ago to me, when I was on a trip,
That's right.
having past life memory come up. It is real and it happens. I also want to call you Anne. So I know that Anne is here with us today,
She is.
through you. You are Anne. So there is that also.
I'm just a
You
different
want to
facet.
hold that energy of that past life come forward. Um, to my
She's
next
truly a lovely
question,
person.
because you talk in your book about your neck issues and how they correlate to that past life. Let's talk about that.
Oh dear. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, I've had 5 surgeries on my neck between 2008 and 2016.
Yeah.
It's left me unable to speak for a long time. I have dysphonia to a certain extent, and I have dysphagia, which is difficulty swallowing. There's a lot of hardware in my neck. Um, Unfortunately, it's left me with a great deal of pain as well. And these surgeries were done in an effort to A, save my spinal cord, which was pinched in half, and B, to keep me from having an unstable cervical spine.
Mhm.
Now, Anne was beheaded with a sword by a French swordsman. They called him the executioner of Calais, I believe, or the swordsman of Calais. But she wasn't executed. Whoops. Is that coming up on your screen? Sorry.
We're
She
fine.
wasn't executed with the typical hatchet that the English use. So she was executed French style. And this was supposed to be an act of mercy by Henry, that he was being so good to her that she got beheaded with a sword instead of an axe. Can you imagine what a pompous ass would think? Never mind. But
No, for real. Because it's been
when
proven by someone back then that was beheaded. He told his friend, blink as long as you can, as long as you're conscious after being beheaded. And he blinked a couple times before
Mhm.
his eyes closed for good.
I was still conscious afterwards, but, and this is written about in the book, um, I think that the story is told that Anne looked around behind her before she was beheaded. And people believe that she was looking for the executioner where he was standing. That's not what happened. Talk about a connection. The connection was with her brother, George. George and Anne were soulmates. They had been husband and wife, they had been lovers before, but in this life they were brother and sister, and they adored each other. They were always for each other, never against. It was that kind of a closeness, and an intellectual and a spiritual closeness that they had. What I found out in doing this, and I found this out recently with Mulata's help, Anne's farewell speech on the platform where she was beheaded was very similar to George's that had happened 2 days before hers, and she hadn't heard it. So I think some of it was channeled. I think George was actually helping her come up with the words to say. It wasn't just a stock speech, but I think George may have been there.
Wow.
The reason why Anne turned around was because someone was behind her, holding her under her arms. And she wanted them to move because they were going to be in the way. That's what she was looking at. Now, after the sword came through, it severed her neck at C5, which is the level of the vocal cords. So when her head hit the ground, Anne remembers seeing it from above. She was taken from her body milliseconds before that sword hit her neck. What makes this killing of a queen so tragic? It's not just getting rid of her so he can have another wife, which he did the day after, but he wanted her silenced. He wanted her silenced for all time. And if he cut her, or if she was cut at the level of her vocal cords, not only was she dead, but she'd never be able to speak again. And this is really the crux of the matter why I wrote this. Anne couldn't speak. I had to speak for her. I know the truth, and I saw what happened, and I felt George right behind me. There I go again, sorry. It's all right, Anne's here.
She is.
So,
When you started telling this
she gets
story,
it.
it got very quiet, very still, very peaceful
Yeah,
here in my house. So yes.
yeah. Yes, she helps me all the time. She wants the story told truly. And those were things that no one else could have known or would have known. And only Anne knew what was going on in in those few seconds. Yes, the swordsman went around behind her. He tiptoed behind her and came from the direction she didn't expect. And yes, bliss or happily, she was beheaded in one stroke, and not multiple strokes, as many who were beheaded by the axe took multiple chops to sever their heads. But recently, I had to go back to the doctor because of my neck. And I asked him, there's a lot of titanium in there right now. I asked him, I said, what if one day I have to have CPR and I arrest? Because I know as a nurse, the first thing they're going to do is open my airway and extend my neck, and my neck won't do that. It would be disastrous if they tried that. I feel like I should have a do not hyperextend neck tattooed on my chest. But I asked him, I said, what would happen if they tried to do that to me? And he says, nothing's going to take your neck apart, honey. Just relax. It's going to stay in one piece. But it's funny how something like that can affect you.
Mhm.
Um,
Of course.
she doesn't
I'm
really
feeling it.
remember any. Are you?
I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It came
continue.
from it came from the side, and it came from my right side. Okay. And the right side is now where all the pain is. So um, I've asked my spirit guides, I got the lesson. I've done what Anne asked me to do. Is the pain ever going to go away? And I don't really have a good answer for that right now.
Mhm.
I think I think there's maybe some more to the story, at least for me. But we're working on strategies to reduce the pain. So
Nice. It's nice when we can get assistance in this life for something that happened in a past life. And sometimes when I'm working with my clients, I know that it's not as severe, but if it's a small thing, sometimes it can be as easy as that was then and this is now. But when you're dealing with
yes,
like that, where, it is such a severe wound, it can show up and be very painful in this life. So hopefully you'll be able to get some relief, you know.
well, it was more than just that. It was silencing and betrayal. The betrayal was epic. This man, King Henry, told Anne that they had a relation. He was obsessed with her for 7 years, and she didn't give it up. Read between the lines. Although everybody assumed that she did, she didn't. I also was a virgin on my first wedding night, so big mistake, by the way. But I was only 20. Um, the the thing with the betrayal, I cannot tolerate betrayal. To me, that is the cardinal sin. If you've lied to me about something and I find out, I'm done with you. And I know, yes, I know that's where it comes from, because that's the kind of betrayal. He never once said, Anne, I will love you only if you give me a son. It was, I will love you for eternity. You are the great love of my life. We are king and queen like Arthur and Guinevere. It was the love for all time. Nothing could separate us. Except for the fact that I didn't give him a son. It was interesting. Right after the first time when I talked to Ainsley, the very first time when we were on a group call, and I told him about the message, your daughter loves you, because I was so worried about my daughter thinking I abandoned her, and I
Mhm.
didn't. Not not because I wanted to. But it was so important for me to know that she forgave me. Ainsley says to me, "You don't have any daughters in this life, do you?" I just have two sons. He knew that day. You don't have any daughters, do you? Nope.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Let's talk
This
about the book because Anne, you want this out. So let's dive into the book, explain to our audience what is this book about and what does Anne share as you through you into this.
Yeah. I call myself Marin in the book. I'm not Kate in the book. I'm Marin in the book. Just get a little bit of distance, okay?
Mhm.
And I've changed the names of a couple of people who helped me through this 2-year period of time that I wrote the book. They are both deeply psychic women, wonderful, wonderful people. But this was all so new to me when I began writing this book. I wasn't sure whether I should make it fiction, nonfiction, memoir. Are you straddling the line? Should you change your name? Who are you going to be? And so the book does closely follow my story. And I say that the book is based on a true story. There might be a detail or two in there that I stretched. But other than that, you know what the truth means to me.
Yes.
I just didn't want anybody that was involved with the making of the book to feel uncomfortable with their names being in it.
Mhm.
And so that's how it happened. But I did have a woman who's a medium work with me in this book. She is a trance medium. She's utterly brilliant. But she has felt for some time that Elizabeth I, Anne's daughter, was coming to visit her. And every time these two ladies and I would get on the telephone, Elizabeth would pop into her life in various forms, young and old, and have something that she wanted to say to her mother. You are so tempted to say, this has just got to be my imagination. One of us is just making this up. Come on. You really are tempted to do it, but there's just no other explanation for it. It just, you know. And so that was also how I found out that George was right. My brother George was right behind me on the scaffold. And he pulled me out of my body before the sword hit my neck. And as I looked down, I saw my own head in the straw. One of the girls that was with me when I wrote this book, she was also one of my dearest friends as Anne. Her name then was Lady Margaret Lee. She was originally Margaret Wyatt, who was the sister of the poet Thomas Wyatt, who was in love with Anne. And she stayed with me the 2 nights before I was beheaded. Mm. And her impressions are also in the book. The things that she remembers and the things that I remember. We had multiple checks and balances as I wrote the book. Things that I would know, just know, because Anne knew them. If Anne knew them, then I knew them. Mm-hmm. And I knew them. If I saw them, Liz, if I saw them as though I was in her body looking out. It wasn't like I was looking at a movie with her in it. I think I have every movie ever made with her in it.
You
And
do.
one of my favorite movie also has the worst Henry in it. So that's another thing. But Anne and I have a lot of crossover between us. I have issue of inferiority, thinking that I'm the sand pebble. And in fact, I know that I'm as unique as everybody. Well, okay.
Yes.
Um,
Yay for
but
doing that. Yes.
one of those little oxymorons. But she and I are both very headstrong, very headstrong. We are both attracted to large, powerful men, physically and otherwise. But ever since that lifetime, I'm terrified to talk to men of power.
Mm.
I won't go near them. I don't like to talk to CEOs. I don't want to talk to the head of your company. I don't want to talk to the director of education. It's just, if you have too much power, you make me very uncomfortable. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, especially large men of power. Um, she was very traditional. She actually was a virgin when Henry took her the first time. They weren't married yet, but she was a virgin. She held out and saved her maidenhead. Um, that was something that was important to her because she never wanted her children to have the mark of bastardy on them. And so she did what she had to do. And Henry was on board with it, believe it or not, because he had to have a royal son. He had had sons before, but they weren't sired on queens. That wasn't
Right.
enough. So both of us are reasonably intelligent. I think she was probably smarter than Henry, and I think she thought that she was. She thought she would make a much better ruler than him, and maybe she would have, but the truth is, there's not a drop of royal blood in either of our veins. Um, she was very strategic and an out-of-the-box thinker, um, and that was unusual in a woman. In the 16th century, women couldn't be called intelligent. At most, they would be called clever. Oh, well, she's very clever.
Mhm.
Really?
Sounds like a
So,
feminist.
yeah, and I am certainly. Um, but the one cardinal sin with both of us is for somebody to say, "You're lying to me." No, I'm not. You just don't believe me. Here, I'll lie to you. My hair is black. But the neck issues, there's there's a lot of different things that cross over, but I had to figure out what was going on with her to figure out what was going on with me.
What would she want us to know?
Uh, she is she has paid her karma. She has paid her karma. She was arrogant. She was power hungry. She was not humble at all, and she could be a real sarcastic, biting tongue. Um, and she acknowledges all of this before she dies. She knows that she's not perfect, but the sins that she has been accused of, adultery, treason, and incest, she did not commit. That's what she wants people to know. She was true to her word, um, and she never sought Henry. Henry insisted on her. She had no choice. No one else would have her once Henry said no.
Sorry about that. I didn't know that was
Oh, okay.
sorry, audience, for that little interruption. Or Anne, sorry for that interruption.
Fine.
Being the feminist that she was, what would she want womanhood to know, womankind to know these days as we're in the divine feminine, as we're coming more online, as we're becoming, empowered as women and owning ourselves and our gifts and our place in the
She
world?
would love to have lived now. She does envy me that from time to time. And she does get a little angry with me from time to time too, because um, I still cut my own grass and clean my own floors and kitchens. She's no, 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 no. Don't do that. Actually, Elizabeth is more upset with me than Anne is. But I think she would love living in this time. She would probably say, claim your power and never give it back. But do you know who really heard her and took it seriously? Her daughter.
Mm,
That's why Elizabeth never married. She was the Virgin Queen because she knew what happened to her mother. And she knew the minute she yielded any of her power to any man for any reason, she was done as queen. So Elizabeth was born royal. Her blood was royal. Nobody could take it away from her as long as she didn't give it up. So no, Anne is a strong woman, and I admire her tremendously for being in the middle of really a pond of alligators. The court was not a nice place. People were out for blood in there, and they would throw anybody under the bus to get what they wanted. Henry certainly did. But nowadays, I think this is going to sound off subject, but the greatest advance in human history is birth control. For the first time in history, women can say yes to one thing and not pay the price.
hmm
And it's not that we don't want our babies. It's just that they cannot be forced upon us, I hope. But
Right.
Anne's
That was
story
a
is
real
different.
issue for women. Still is sometimes in some
It
areas of
is.
the world. It is an
It is.
issue. And I want
True.
to also go back and highlight when that alarm went off, what you were saying about Anne, and she was not this and she was not that, and she did not do that. And I think that that alarm was no mistake, to highlight what she really wants people to know, that what
Mhm.
she was accused of just wasn't true.
It was
It was
not
not
true.
her truth. And
She confessed to her confessor right before she died, and she asked Kingston, the keeper of the White Tower, to come and hear it. She wanted the world to know,
mhm,
you don't lie about that last confession. You better be telling the truth because when you get to the other side, there are consequences.
yeah.
But she was telling the truth. Maybe I was saucy. Maybe I was arrogant. Maybe I challenged power. I'm sure she did. But I didn't do those things. So she's a good woman. She's a brilliant woman who survived in times that I don't know if I could. I don't know that I'd have had the guts.
I know it was very hard back then.
It was. It was. Has anyone asked you what, if you could go back in history, what time you would like to go back to?
That's the time. And it's
Eh,
so strange because I think that that was a really difficult time, but I, since the time I can remember, have been fascinated with that time in history for forever.
You
The
know,
Renaissance fairs, all of it.
for
Dressing up
me,
in the gowns. Mom made me some gowns,
oh
and
boy,
corsets and the whole thing. Like,
yeah.
love it.
But for me, I've always said if I would go back to almost any period you asked me to go to, but only as a man,
I bet.
only as a man.
Yeah, really difficult for the women back then.
Very, very difficult for the women back then.
And especially the women who were set to be in ruling positions, and then they were pitted against each other, which I think is programming that we're still trying to get over today.
Yes, yes.
Women.
And of course, the minute you show any power, some man comes raving at you with a Bible in his hand, yelling, "You're a witch!" It's witchcraft. That's the most
Yeah.
absurd thing of all. Come on, guys, get a new one. Try a different title, something else.
I know. It's time to get rid of that one for good. And the thing is, these days we're not stepping down,
No,
we're standing up despite someone coming in our face and saying something like that, which I'm excited about.
I don't want us to move backward.
Yeah, no backwards, only
No
forward.
backwards, only forward.
As we wrap up, Kate, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience?
I think we've covered it, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I hope people will be interested enough to buy my book. I am Anne Boleyn, the picture on the front and on the back. I'm not sure if you can see that. Here we go. They were both created by one of the psychics that helped me, who was Lady Lee in Anne's time, and she drew these from memory. So it's available at Amazon Kindle, and I hope you like it.
Awesome. Kate, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure. So happy to have you on to talk about the book and have Anne talk about the book. Thank you, Anne, for being here with us and for
You're
challenging
most
the book.
welcome.
And I loved the book. I read the book. I highly recommend the book. It's great to go back in history and relive those moments again. So thank you, Kate. And you can find that book on Amazon, and that link will be down in the show notes, everybody. So thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for joining me. Again, this is Liz Peterson, and you're listening to Raise the Vibe with Liz. You can find me at raisethevibewithliz.com and Raise the Vibe with Liz on all social media. Thank you, everybody, and remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a good day now. Bye.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Kate. Bye now.